Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, a bunch of entitled brats vandalized my brand new car right after I bought it. Their entitled mother believes her kids can do no wrong and they get the punishment they deserve. Here is what happened, let's dive right into the video. So up until last month, I've always assumed that people never commit or do anything without a motive, which I now know is not always the case. My sister recently made a new friend courtesy of the daycare services she uses for her child, and because we all live close, I often see them out together. This new friend of hers has 4 children, 3 teenagers and 1 infant. Anyway, she seemed normal enough when I met her. Perhaps some might say she comes on a little strongly, but that's certainly no biggie. As for the kids, from what my sister has told me, she only really pays any attention to the youngest, which I'm sure creates some tension in their household. Anyway, enough of the context for the time being. Last month I had received a large check from the business I work for as a bonus and had decided to treat myself to something nice. I know a lot of people would consider this more than just something nice, but I'd been thinking of getting it for a while before this point. So I decided to buy a Mercedes and was able to pay for it in full all in one go. I drove out of the dealership feeling obviously very happy and accomplished, and decided the first thing I would do was drive around for a while and just get used to the feeling of the car and all the mechanics. I drove up around most of the houses in my area, selfishly rejoicing in the lingering stares I got. As I was making my way back home, I noticed that the road I usually took was shut for some construction work in the pipes. Anyway, I realized I would have to take the back road route home, which I was already not looking forward to in my brand new car, what with all the potholes and such. Therefore, I drove fairly slowly as not to damage the car and left plenty of space between myself and any cars coming towards me. Just as I was on the last little stretch of road before I would be able to turn back onto regular tarmac, I spotted 3 figures stood at the side of the road. There was no pavement, this was already a fairly odd occurrence. All 3 of them were wearing hoodies pulled far over their heads, so I was unable to see what they looked like. Obviously suspicious, I sped up slightly and drifted out into the middle of the already narrow road to avoid them. All of a sudden, I felt the car lurch and realized that one of my front wheels had dipped into a pothole and caused the car to lurch to one side. I immediately slammed on the brakes as the car had lurched in the direction of a tree on the opposite side of the road to the 3 figures. Just as I had finished shaking myself off from the situation, I heard glass shatter and felt a small amount spray over the back of my neck, causing a small amount of blood to come pouring out. I frantically turned around and watched as the 3 figures bashed away at my brand new car with their bats that they must have been hiding behind their backs. "What on earth are you doing?" I yelled, utterly confused as to what was happening. They stayed silent other than their continuous laughing and just carried on smashing my car all over the place. They knocked off both mirrors, slashed the tires, made numerous dents in the sides and smashed the windows. Before they could go any further, I got out of my car and continued yelling, "What do you think you're doing? Do you have any idea how much these damages are gonna cost you?" "Come on, old man, it's just a bit of fun," one of the 3 replied, and I knew I recognized the voice from somewhere. The other 2 laughed and they began to advance on me with their bats raised. Before they could take another step, I whipped out the gun I keep in my vest and I aimed it at them sharply. They froze, removing their hoods and putting their hands up. I immediately recognized them as the 3 teens of my sister's new friend, and they clearly recognized me as they looked at each other like they knew how much they messed up. "Look, mister, we were just having a bit of a laugh, you know," one of the boys spoke up, his voice shaking from fear. "How is this a bit of a laugh? You've completely wrecked my car." "I'm a veteran, so I promise you my shots never miss," I responded, adding on the last part as I could practically see a plan forming on their faces to make a dash for it. "Well, you cannot possibly prove it was us who did this, right? And it's not like you're actually gonna shoot us." Another one of the boys spoke up, shrugging his shoulders and then quickly making a dart down the road. The other 2 looked at each other and followed. I lowered my gun and stared at the wreckage that was left behind, wondering if I'd somehow dreamt up such a bizarre situation. Luckily for me, the garage where I'd bought the car had fitted 2 cameras, one on the front and one on the back. I quickly called the police to get them down here as soon as possible. I informed them that I was carrying a weapon so they would not be spooked upon approach. When they got here, I recounted everything that had happened, and even they found it puzzling that 3 boys would randomly attack out of nowhere. Once I loaded the footage that I had downloaded of the cameras to my phone, they of course believed me. Roughly 30 minutes later, a tow truck arrived to take the wreckage away so that it was no longer blocking the road. I made a police report and was informed that I would be waiting to hear back for a couple of days. As I was close to home already, I had no trouble walking back the extra journey, although I was certainly more anxious than I had been of that morning. A couple days later, I was walking to my local shop when my sister's friend came charging at me at the speed of light, holding some paper in her hand. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, shoving the paper at my chest. I quickly skimmed it and saw that it was a court appeal for the 3 boys I had received a similar one that morning. "It is what it is," I replied and made a move to walk past her after handing it back. No, my boys would never do anything wrong. Why are you making up such a lie, you horrible man?" "You won't win this case, it's a waste of your time," she rambled on, stepping in front of me to block my path. "Let's just see what happens in court then, shall we?" I responded with a smirk and walked past her once more. This time we were nearer to the store and there was a guard nearby, and seeing what was happening, he came over, which quickly stopped her following me. And then a few weeks later, I found myself in court with the 3 boys. In my police report, I had obviously pressed charges, so here we were. We were in court for no more than 2 hours. The footage I provided was more than enough evidence that the boys were guilty of the crimes I accused them of. That did not stop them trying to lie their way out of it, however. One of them claimed that they were high off of unknown substances, which, as you can imagine, worked out even further against them. Another claimed that I purposefully swerved and tried to run them over, but again, the footage shows that I hit a pothole and swerved in the opposite direction. They ended up being sentenced to 200 hours of community service each, as well as a significant amount of time behind bars and a debt totaling the amount of the car to be repaid to me in full within the next 6 months. Of course, given that they were going to be behind bars, it would be the mother taking on this payment, something she clearly was not happy about, as she cursed and screamed at me as we were leaving the courthouse. Their mother also ended up being charged with mild cases of child neglect, considering how odd her son's behavior was, and her infant was removed from her care. My sister understandably stopped talking to her and cut her off completely. Moral of the story: although you might think just because you've done nothing wrong, bad things can still happen to you, and they might come in the form of 3 teenage boys. And yeah, ripe stars, unfortunately that is already the end of the story, but I think that Karen and her stupid sons got what they deserved in the end, and if you enjoyed the story, then please don't forget to like the video and maybe even leave a comment, because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. And the next one is titled Douchebag Revenge. When I was an auto mechanic, there was this one floating manager called Brad. He was kind of a clown and was always acting like a child. One day he somehow managed to splash windshield washer fluid on my arm. I acted like it was a horrible thing and how I was deathly allergic to it. Of course he didn't believe me, because who would, right? So Brad decided to go out for lunch. While he was gone, I slapped my arm over and over again to make it turn bright red. Right about the time he pulled up to the shop, I made myself vomit on the shop floor. Brad walks in and sees vomit and asks what happened. I showed him my arm and told him it was the washer fluid. He turned white as a ghost and apologized so much. He bought me lunch for 2 days and didn't mess with me again. It was so funny, revenge was sweet. Edit: after giving more thought to this post and reading the comments, I remember how it happened. This was like 20 some odd years ago, so my memory is a little foggy on the whole thing, but the gist is that he pranked me by spraying washer fluid on me, so I pranked him back by slapping my arm to make it red and vomiting. I had few limits that I would go to just mess with people. I don't do that much anymore, but back then I loved making people cringe. The next one is titled Malicious Satisfaction. For a little more context, I work as a receptionist at a medical clinic, and it's not my job of choice. Even though I don't love my job, I take it serious, as other people's health is not a joke. In addition to having the job policy of doing the best job possible at the moment, having to correct later what is much more work. I have seen many clients who are rude or disrespectful, including an elderly lady trying to beat my coworker using a cane, which became the unit's internal joke for that month. In another day's work, a client arrives with 3 pages of exams to take, big but not the biggest I've ever seen, and as always I added each exam to the system. Keep in mind that it is not the only step in the work, it is still necessary in some medical plans to make additional requests and add each individual code back to the health insurance system. As the client was on the phone, the first part was very quiet, but when she finished the call, she started complaining and insisted on being in a very loud tone for the whole place to hear, talking about how long I was taking and how much time she needed too much to be there. As professionally as possible, I said what I was doing. The most delayed part, I was attaching the order to a fixed agreement and waiting for the return. The client asked to speak to my supervisor, who was already coming to see what had happened. My supervisor knows this type of client very well, and he knows that it is not possible to do all the procedures by magic with all the professional words he explained to the client. The client did not accept what my supervisor said and demanded that my supervisor substitutes me for opening the record. My supervisor, being responsible for the area, had to resolve the situation. Now comes the part that the client does not know. All the forms have to be opened at the login of who was making the request, and I was no longer responsible. So with a big smile, I erased everything I spent almost 2 hours doing, and bonus, I had to cancel the request for medical insurance. Good luck having to wait another 2 hours for a completed medical record to be done again, in addition to the time after the exams are approved in the health insurance. And the next story is titled Satisfying Revenge. A little backstory first. My older brother adopted me when I was 14. I lived with him, his wife and her 2 children, one a couple months older than me, the other one a year older. I've never gotten along with the younger one. His mother and father went through a divorce and both parents spoiled the hell out of him. His father owned several businesses, making around $1 million a year, so he's your typical entitled douchebag who has always clashed with me, someone who grew up poor. That's the type of dude that kicked the dog we all raised from a 4-week-old puppy because she was excited to see him after not seeing him for 6 months and she was jumping around. He's the type of dude that has ruined Thanksgiving because the milk was 2% instead of 1 by screaming, yelling and cussing everyone out, at the age of 29. Now on to the story. I was on a phone plan with his mother, but I lost my job, unable to pay the last $60 I owe her, but we had worked it out that I would pay her back on Thanksgiving by installing a stereo, my brother's, her husband's, new pickup. A little over a week ago, I was picking up Fallout 4 for a friend who was at work at the GameStop in the local mall. Nephew works across the little walkway and saw me walk in from outside where he was walking into work. While I am in the line, he comes in, cuts in front of everyone and cusses me out, saying I should not be buying games when I owe his mom money. I told him he needed to back the hell off and not talk about anything he knew nothing about. He kept going on and on, running his mouth. I got my friend's game and walked out with him, following me out the door. When I got to the door, he stopped ranting and went back to work with a smug look on his face. I lived with this guy for years, so I know him very well. When I hopped in my car, I realized he had parked in front of me and my dash cam was on. He sells weed out of his truck to subsidize his low wages at the mall, and I remembered that he always showed up to work early to do so. I rewound my dash cam and sure enough, you could clearly see him sell weed. I sent an email with the video of him selling the weed to the management of the mall from a new email address as a concerned citizen. 3 days later, while talking to my brother, he told me that my nephew got fired from his job and banned from the mall property. My response: that sucks. Enjoy not getting that unemployment check, douchebag. And the next one is titled Southern Revenge is the Best. My stepmother is the queen of Southern, bless your heart style backhanded kindness. She's petite with a cute little Southern accent and everything she says is so sweet if you take it at face value. My sister and I have tried to talk to our father about how mean she can be, but he says we are reading into it too much. A couple weeks ago, my husband and I hosted Passover with 11 adults and 2 kids. Passover is already a point of contention because she repeatedly, not so subtly, excluded my husband, who is not Jewish. She arrived an hour early without notice with 2 of my stepbrothers with intellectual disabilities to help. And also, she brought a gift, a wine glass that she made a point of indicating is decorated to be for the woman of the house. For context, by tradition, different family members bless certain things on the Sabbath and holidays, and the husband blesses the wine. She and my father recently moved into a new house and their open house was last week. She forwarded me the invite she sent to her family a week earlier. It opened with a checklist starting with stepmom and dad move in, followed by all the great things in her kids' lives. And she suggested my husband and I come in between her family in the morning and her friends in the afternoon, so we would not feel overwhelmed. So my husband and I went with our dogs. No, we didn't tell her in advance, we just assumed she would be fine with it because she always says she loves them so much. We enter the house and her grandchildren shout, "Doggy!" and start rubbing bellies. She tried to suggest we leave them in her son's house across the street since it would be much easier on us. I kindly thanked her, but insisted it was no trouble at all. Then we gladly followed my father on a tour of the house, taking plenty of time in each and every room. She watched as her nice new house that all her friends were coming to ended up smelling like dogs, and she had to smile the whole time. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, I am always a big fan of this Southern kindness, as OP calls it. Those stories are usually always very entertaining. And the next one is titled, Never Cut in Line. So for Christmas one year, my parents got us a season pass for Six Flags. We used those passes often throughout the summer as a family and had an amazing time. It was one of these days that it happened. We waited in line for one of the more popular lines, which was at the 45-minute wait point. This was relatively good for this ride, as you can wait for up to an hour and a half at its busiest points. We got into line excited to share this ride with our dad, as it is one of the few he can ride as he has a bad back injury and that makes just walking around extremely painful at times. As we were in line laughing and making jokes while watching the little TVs they have at various points in the line, a group of people rudely cut in front of us and stood there. Our dad has a habit of not letting things slide, so we all braced for cover, waiting for our dad to go off on these people for cutting us when, to our surprise, he did not say anything. With confused looks, we turned to our dad, wondering why he had not told them off and to get behind us. He just looked at us with a look in his eyes saying, "Wait for it." We shrugged it off and continued our wait. We did not make it too far into the line at this point, so it was still about a 45-minute wait. As we got closer to the front of the line, we got more and more excited waiting to get on the ride with our dad and have a great time. The way the line is set up is before you get into the loading station, there is a two-way staircase that has the regular line on one side and the fast pass line on the other, and at the top of the stairs there are workers making sure the people in the fast pass line are supposed to be there. This is where my dad strikes. After waiting the 45 minutes in line behind the cutters, we stood at the top of the stairs and my dad signaled for a worker's attention. Once he received it, he pointed to the group that had cut us and calmly stated that they had cut us at the beginning of the line. The worker then politely told the group they would need to leave the line and go back to the beginning. They were pissed but followed the instructions and left the line. The worker thanked my father for informing them and suddenly pieces pushed into place in our mind. Our dad purposely waited until the very last minute to make them have to wait another 45 minutes, plus more time as the line was longer now that it was later in the day and more people arrived. I couldn't help but laugh as I watched them walk out of the line and back towards the beginning and just hope that they learned their lesson not to cut after that. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.